people will have you believe that once you reach a certain age, you're done. Like you figured it out, or you should have it figured out. And then that's just how you are and who you are for the rest of your life. That's definitely not true. The fact that your identity develops and evolves over time doesn't ever really stop. And so at this age, I still feel like I have a lot of room to become different things, to explore different sides of myself and to evolve. Although the younger me, 25-year-old me was like, oh, I know exactly who I am.
Right,
I'm
me
done.
too.
I know my values. I know what I want. Khalas, you know? And that quickly gets upended. Welcome to another episode of Sage Takes Time. What are we talking about today?
Ourselves. I'm Elissa.
I'm Amira. And that's the episode. That's who we
That's
are.
it. That's who we are. Thanks for tuning in. Tune in next week when we ask each other how old we are.
Very short episodes.
That's it for the attention span of Gen Z.
This episode is about identity, which is like a multi-layered, complex, vague, sometimes
multicultural, multi-dimensional
notion. Is it like identity? It's intangible, but is it?
Yeah.
So in that context, who are you?
Who am I? You know what? Who I am is constantly evolving. I'm learning. I'm also learning that I thought I know who I was, and I'm totally still like learning who I am actually with every layer and every like therapy session and every book I read, and every day I'm figuring out more and more who I am. The top line bullet points are: I'm an Emirati of Lebanese and American descent who was born and raised in Paris, France, and educated in the French, British, and American systems.
Wow. You took all the things.
Yeah, I'm also a multilingual founder of a feminist media platform. And I have lived in many, many places also. Yeah. So I'm someone who constantly seeks more and is curious about the world and how it can relate to me and my curiosity. Who are you?
Well, yours is so interesting, I feel like. Who am I? I agree that it's like a constant dynamic process. And I feel like the people will have you believe that once you reach a certain age, you're done. Like you figured it out, or you should have it figured out. And then that's just how you are and who you are for the rest of your life. That's definitely not true. I'll start with my age because I'm very proud of it. So I'm 41.
Yeah.
And I'll be closer to 42 when this actually gets online, which is, I think, is really beautiful. And I'm learning to embrace it more and more. And yeah, that's to my point of like the fact that your identity develops and evolves over time doesn't ever really stop. And so at this age, I still feel like I have a lot of room to become different things, to explore different sides of myself and to evolve. Although the younger me would have thought, like 25-year-old me was like, oh, I know exactly who I am.
Right,
I'm
me
done.
too.
I know my values. I know what I want. I know who I... Khalas, you know? And that quickly gets upended. But my bullet points are that I'm Egyptian. I'm Arab. I am, I guess, a third culture kid. I was born and lived for 8 years in Alexandria, Egypt. And then I moved to the US and lived there for 10 years. So I was raised in America, but with very Egyptian parents that really cared about making sure we were connected to our roots. And so I always had both sides. I never like assimilated overly to the American society and culture. Like they wouldn't have allowed that. And I actually really appreciate them for that. I didn't at the time, but now I think it was great.
Okay, interesting take.
Yeah. And then moved back to Egypt when I was entering university, and I just stayed and have worked here for a long time. And so I've been in media for a long time. I've done journalism. Now I do storytelling, directing, producing. So I obviously really love stories. I always have. I just have always found a lot of passion behind talking to people, learning who they are, and then somehow like telling their stories to the world in different forms. So I'm also like a sister, a wife, a cat mom, a daughter, a friend. Yeah.
You and I are both also advocates and activists in our own way. And that's where we click. But what I think is really funny is how similar our backgrounds are, without actually being
Yeah.
copy-pasted similarly. I'm also Arab American, but I'm Lebanese with an American mom. You're like Arab American because you're Egyptian,
Yeah.
who grew up after 8 years old in the United States.
Yeah.
And we both returned to the Middle East in our 20s. Well, no, you returned in your teens.
I was 18, yeah.
We both sought a reconnection and a belonging with the Arab side of our identity after our adoptive homes didn't allow us to fully assimilate and integrate. Like France did not want me at the time growing up. Like I was very much an outsider.
You felt that way, or you...
Yeah, totally. And I felt like I'm Parisian, I'm not French, because I grew up.
What's the difference?
Well, the French people will tell you. The Parisians are like city people. They're, for me, my world of France was Paris, was all the neighborhoods of Paris, all the little corners and the pockets that I got to discover. Like every different arrondissement neighborhood has memories for me. And I know the city like the back of my hand. It helped forge my identity, and each place at a different stage in my life. But I couldn't tell you what was on French TV at the time that I was growing up. I couldn't tell you who the popular French singers were for those 23 years that I lived in France.
Is that because did you not have access to that, or were you just not interested, or because you were from like a half Arab household, it was dominated? Like, what's the reason?
It was that. It was the fact that I was in an Arab household, even though my mom's American, and there was a lot of American culture kind of sprinkled in there. And we'd go to the States once a year and things like that. It was still a very predominantly Arabic household, Lebanese household, surrounded by Lebanese people and Lebanese community. And if there was content or TV shows or music that was being played, it was all Western, and it was all British or American or some vague Lebanese Elissa or like ancestral type music. Like I also am not Lebanese enough to be able to tell you like who the most popular actors were or what were the big TV shows at the time. So in that way, I wasn't integrated into France or into Lebanon, but
I think it's definitely, there's a lot of similarities in our experiences, but I think it's more difficult or more challenging, I guess, to figure out who you are and what your identity is if you're like your parents are of different nationalities and you're mixed race, right? Yeah, like, and you come from all these different places. While I think it's a little bit easier maybe to like, my parents are Egyptian, I'm from Egypt, my family's here, like this is what I know and everything. I lived in the States for a while, so I'm Arab American, but then I don't really call myself that, to be honest, and I don't identify that way. I do maybe when I'm there, but once I'm outside of America, I feel like it's so irrelevant. I'm Egyptian, you know?
Yeah.
So I feel like maybe, I don't know, like it's still difficult also to like, I also don't have that sense of belonging because a lot of places are home, and then so nowhere is home, and at different times that like changes and fluctuates. Do you feel like it's a lot harder when even your family is very mixed, or was it more enriching, or did it make it more challenging?
Well, it's not that it's harder, it's just that each one of my parents battled for us to recognize their cultural effect on us. So my mom will always say, don't forget you're American, you're an American kid, you're from America, America's your country. And my dad will also like very clearly be like, بس انت لبنانية ولبنان بيتك وما بعرف. So instilling, like, my dad made sure I had Arabic lessons, and then my English was really busted when I was a kid. So my mom put me in a British school to learn English because she wanted to make sure that I was going to connect with it. She made sure that I had Halloween when France didn't celebrate Halloween. So she would like figure it out and like make a fake Halloween trick or treat thing around Paris and with the American community there to make sure that I could have some semblance of like bits of culture. But I also am very fluid with how I define my identity depending on who I'm talking to.
Yeah.
You know,
that's a big part of it.
When I'm in the Arab world, I'm Lebanese. You know, that's how I'm going to define myself, and that's how people expect to define me, because how do I relate to them? Yeah. And in the Arab world, I am Arab, therefore I'm Lebanese primarily. The fact that I was born in France, only in Lebanon, makes it like Frenchy type, thing. And the fact that I'm American is kind of more like a cultural like sprinkling, But when I'm in France, I'm the American one.
Oh. Wow, I thought you were going to say like then you're French, or
no,
like because you were raised there.
Because if I'm raised in France, I present more American to them, what they expect an American to look like, act like, speak like, than I do a Lebanese person or a French person.
Okay.
you
And
know.
in America,
In America, I'm like exotic.
you're like, what are you?
Yeah.
Why are you here?
They look at me and they're like, your accent sounds weird. Like, what are you, like from the Midwest
Where
or
are you
something?
really from?
Yeah. And then I'll say
Fuck
something
you.
like, I'm Lebanese, but I grew up in France. Wow, France, Lebanon? Like, oh my God. Like, she's so exotic. It's like this thing. So it completely, each one will adopt a different thing.
Yeah. I feel like language, you mentioned language and being multilingual and learning different languages. I think that's a really big part of what our identities become also, because that was something my parents were careful about, because I did speak Arabic because I lived in Egypt for 8 years. So that had like a really good foundation. So I spoke Egyptian Arabic. I didn't really learn the Arabic language as far as like written Arabic and classic Arabic فصحى يعني.
Yeah,
Or
صعب قوي.
I knew Arabic and I spoke Arabic well enough, and I had that foundation. That was my mother tongue, I guess, my first language. But I wasn't in school in Egypt only until first grade. So I didn't write Arabic well. I couldn't like communicate in Arabic written, and I couldn't read Arabic as well as I could speak it. So I had a lot of challenges there. And then when we went to the US, we had to learn English, or become fluent in English. There was always a struggle between like speak English all the time so you can become fluent and you sound normal in your school and whatever. But also they didn't want us to forget Arabic, because they saw other like Egyptian families, their kids were born there and didn't speak any Arabic, and they were very like Americanized. So they were very afraid of that on a language level, but also on what that meant, like maybe culturally and socially. You know, like if you're so American that you don't even speak Arabic, then you're gonna do things that like are unacceptable like you're gonna start dating early, or you're gonna rebel against the culture more because you're not gonna identify with it as much. So language was very important for them on all those levels. But then coming back to Egypt, I would trip up on the language elements, because if I'm in America, I'm speaking English fluently and I sound like an American, whatever. But then when I get to Egypt, I have to start speaking Arabic. And when I was growing up, I would come visit in the summers, and at first I would trip up on my Arabic, and by the third month I would be like, I don't know what their English word, like بشرشح كده يعني اللي هو
شرشح.
What's بشرشح? It's like very Egyptian, very Alexandrian way of speaking, you know? So there was always this like language battle. But now as storytellers, when we communicate in English to an Arabic speaking audience or in the Arab world, we get judged for it. We're like, who are you talking to? And it's like, this is just how we speak. Because
this is just how we speak. People got upset when I was telling them I'm going to do a podcast and it's going to be in English. Because Arabic's the way to go. And you'll get the audience in Arabic and that's where the money is. بس صراحة العربي تبعني شوي مكسر يعني. وأنا مش كتير مرتاحة أحكي عربي like publicly. And I'm not funny in Arabic. Like, I don't know if you get that, but there's different sides of your personality that come out in different languages.
For sure.
And I mean, maybe you guys think I'm not funny in English, but I'm not.
We think you're
But like, I think I'm funny in English. And like being funny in French only came later when I surrounded myself with more French speakers and became more confident in making my little mess ups. But I'm not funny in half the languages that I speak. So it's a different side of me. I'm more serious in Arabic, or I'm calmer, I'm quieter. So
you look white.
I do.
Yeah. I was going to try to say it like in a different way. You look white.
I have my mama's genes.
Yeah.
I definitely got the more American, Scandinavian, Irish genetics from my mom's side. And so I'm what people would call white appearing.
Yeah.
Because I don't necessarily identify as like white as the label. I identify as Lebanese and American and French and Emirati. And I identify as this mix proudly.
Yeah.
But I look white AF. And that means that very often people assume I don't speak Arabic. So they'll talk shit about me, or they'll talk about me in spaces. But it also means that I benefit from a lot of the privileges of white,
you're white passing,
identity.
I guess people would say.
You're white passing. But white passing tends to be, I think the technical like definition of white passing are people who choose themselves to pass as white because it works in their benefit. Because of the privileges of looking white and being white, you being racialized as white, you benefit from all of these things. And so they're choosing to pass as white. But white appearing means that I appear white to others. They might racialize me as white, even if I at no point identify myself that way.
Oh, I didn't actually realize that was the nuance of that definition.
Yeah, it's something, it took me a while because I used to say that until I learned more about it. And until actually I spent, you know, in America, it's so reductive. So in the summers when I'd go back home, it's like you're either white, you're black, or you're Mexican.
Right.
Brown was not even that popular at the time in America. It literally
wasn't a thing. Yani.
It wasn't a thing. Like the color brown wasn't a color that was actively like discussed. It was literally white or black or Mexican. Like they reduced everyone else to Mexico.
Yeah. So I actually, on my side, I got, I guess, a Mexican appearing. Right. I don't know. Like people thought when in the States, because I grew up there in the 90s.
Yeah.
And so there was an influx of immigrants of all types, especially where I was, like in different areas of New York. There was an influx of Mexican immigrants or Dominican, Latin, Puerto Rican, like things like that.
Right.
And so because of the way my hair and my color or whatever, they're like, oh, you're not white, you're not black, you must be Mexican.
Right.
And it's like, what? And so I was so confused. I remember being in, I think, 4th grade.
Yeah.
So that it was like my 2nd year in America.
Did people just speak Spanish to you?
Yeah, no, that happened all the time.
Oh, that's amazing.
My dad loved it, by the way. He looks very Latino, especially when he was younger and had like jet black hair, slicked it back, and he wanted to be like Ricky Ricardo.
Yeah.
So he'd go around like speaking the 2 sentences of Spanish that he knew, like "Cómo estás?" whatever. And
Hola, habibi, ¿cómo
and then
estás?
people, like after the 3rd sentence, he's like, "Yeah, no, I'm not Mexican." But I mean, it was weird because I didn't, obviously, I had friends and stuff, but I wasn't surrounded by Mexican culture because I felt like I didn't have any other choices and Arab wasn't a thing. We had Arab American friends and Egyptian families around us, but not in the same town. So I wasn't in school with people that were like me or had spoken Arabic at all, or even with any Muslim kids in school, in the different schools I went to. I feel like I'm afraid to say this. I'm just going to say it.
Say it.
It was easier for me to like appreciate and kind of link myself more to like Black culture with like appropriation. But I was young.
It's not necessarily to cope, to defend. And I also think like what's funny is that there's a difference in America between the term Black and the term African American.
Yes.
And you are literally African and American because you're Egyptian, but you're Arab. But then there's this whole like regional debate of like the Africa v. the Arab thing. But like you literally come from a country that is on the continent of Africa and have a nationality that is in America.
Middle Eastern or Arab, which in the 90s wasn't a checkbox. It wasn't a category in the census. So I remember being in like 4th grade and everyone had to fill out the census form. And one of the things was like, what race are you? Which I think is very weird to do to people that age anyway. Like ask their parents.
Or on the SATs.
Or
also.
But I mean, the SATs, you're like in a teenager at that point. I was 8 or 9, you know? I saw like Caucasian, Black, Asian, whatever, like maybe, I don't remember what other things there were. I didn't see Arab or Egyptian or North African or Middle Eastern. So I raised my hand to the teacher and I was like, excuse me, I don't know like what to check off. And she's like, oh, well, what are you? You know, she knew I was Egyptian. She's like, maybe write other.
Yeah.
Literally, like the idea of being othered. And I didn't realize at the time what was happening to me until I was much, much older and looked back at things I had experienced as an immigrant child in America.
I also would switch. I would switch with whatever box I had to tick. But like I remember at one point I was like, well, I guess Lebanon is technically in Asia, so I'll be Asian.
Yeah.
And then I'd write, okay, I'm going to other and I'm going to literally list out what I am underneath, or today I'm going to be white. Like there was no space for it. But I remember being othered very, very early. Like I had a very mixed, multicultural group of kids in my primary school. But when I went to school, like I went to a British school and it was a very predominantly white British school and white Anglo British Commonwealth country representation. Like it was like Irish people, Scottish people, Welsh, British, Australian, you know, like that genre. A couple Canadians and American. But there was maybe in my class one person who was from Africa and me.
Yeah.
Like that was it. And already I went from this crazy multicultural play where we sang happy birthday in like 6 languages because we would learn each other's Japanese and Spanish and whatever. And then I went to this school where it was just me, and I remember her name's Sarah, and I was like, so it's gonna be just us, girl. I guess it's us against it. And my brother had that experience where he ended up being into music, and all his friends were any other person of color, which was about 4 to 5 other people in his grade at that time. And that's just who we associated with, was the others.
Yeah.
So within this other, even though things are evolving and there's new boxes that are being checked, I think now Arab is a box that you can check. So. But I wonder about the label of like Middle Easterner.
The Middle East is a super problematic term.
Why? Or because Arabs don't know what to define as the Middle East?
No, because it's like, what are you east of? Like middle of where? Yani, it's very, it's like, yani, you're just, it's very much from the perspective as if like America is
or Britain actually.
Or the UK. Yeah, like there's a side of the world that is the center of everything, and then everything else is in reference to that also. So you're here, so you're like not so east, but you're like the middle, and you're the Middle East.
We can also be the far left if Australia is the center of the world, you know, or if Russia was the center of those maps that we all had up in schools, we would be east or north or separate too. Or if this sphere was tilted slightly differently and opened up. I get your point totally. So what's a better term then? If we're not Middle East because we're east of something or west of whatever.
For me, like in the Womena context, for example, I prefer to say the Arab world, Arab women, things like that. Although a lot of people will have issues with like, what is Arab, where is Arab, or Egyptians Arab, it's also problematic. But for me, it's a little bit better than Middle East. I also would ideally prefer not to say anything because Americans don't feel the need to do that, right? They don't say like stories from American perspectives.
From the Northwest
like from North America, like south of Canada, north of they don't feel the need to
geographically associate themselves.
Exactly. While we feel the need to always like place ourselves in the world to validate whatever it is, like our voices, our perspectives, our stories, our very existence even as humans, you know. So that is very colonial in its perspective of the world. When we can just say, like for a media company like Womena, we can just say we're a feminist media company.
Yeah.
I get why saying that we focus on Arab women in and from the region. I get why. But would we feel the need to say that if we're British or American? No.
No. And people don't, by the way. Like in general, they don't isolate the fact that they're a media company aimed at Western women.
Yeah.
Northwestern English-speaking women. Like they don't have to specify that. But especially with communities and cultures that are disenfranchised and that are not the mainstream, I think it is important to kind of highlight that you're bringing a different perspective to the table and that perspective comes from a culture or a mix of cultures or a type of experience that's collectively part of a community that shares certain things.
Because it's important, I guess, indicates that there's a gap and there's a gap because other people are dominating the space.
Yeah.
And that's why it's cool, because like the dominant narrative or media or mainstream is coming at us from elsewhere.
Yeah.
So we feel the need to like identify that way. I think when we talk about our identities, we also need to acknowledge our privileges that we either realize or don't realize. So for me, for example, I feel like a lot of the things that I learned from the experience of being an immigrant child of an immigrant family in the 90s in America, a lot of the challenges that came with and the struggles and the obstacles or whatever, I look back at them now, but I also cannot do that without recognizing all the advantages it gave me, like just purely being back in Egypt and having like being fluent in English at the time as a writer gave me like a huge leg up and gave me opportunities that I would not have had if my just language skills were not as good. And I'm sure there are a million other ways that gave me privileges and still does to this day, and advantages that other people don't have. So like that's one thing. My extended family and my family when I was younger were okay financially, but one of the reasons why we went to the US was because my father was seeking financial security and needed to leave the country to find better opportunities. And so financial security for me has been an issue that we struggled with as a family and as an individual. But then over time, because they made that move and sacrificed a lot to give us a better life, now we're able to like reap the benefits of that. And so now I feel financially, compared to a lot of people, especially living in Egypt, especially these years, I'm a lot more comfortable. Now I feel like I'm privileged in that way. When I was younger, no, I didn't come from like wealth privilege.
Mm-hmm. It wasn't a dialogue when we were younger.
Yeah.
Like the concept of privilege being addressed, identified, like recognizing your privilege, that's only something that's really come out in the last like 5 to 10 years, maybe.
Yeah.
Big max, like say, with Instagram's popularity and people calling others out for the privileges that they hold and acting in solidarity with those who do not carry those same privileges.
Yeah.
If you have the privilege of a platform, speak up. If you have the privilege of not being excluded from spaces where others aren't allowed, advocate for their inclusion in that space. Make space for those other people. I've benefited from so many privileges that I never was necessarily aware of because I wasn't French. I didn't have the privileges of being French. I didn't get to benefit from the governmental privileges that French citizens and residents get to benefit from, healthcare and things like that. But I didn't understand until later in my 20s the concept of like white appearing privilege or pretty privilege, right? Or wealth privilege. That's very uncomfortable to bring up and to address. But in my path of activism and change making, I started recognizing more how my privilege could contribute to the inclusion and the space making for those who otherwise wouldn't have the chance. You know, a lot of like the privilege of wealth has been used to finance a platform like Womena to create a space for alternative perspectives and voices and people to be recognized, to contribute to the historical archive of the world. And for me, I rest easy knowing that, you know, my pretty privilege means that I can take advantage of the initial need of people to like look and want to be like, wow, you're so pretty, for me to actually say something of value to them that might hit at the heart of that issue. The white appearing means that I very often won't be othered first and foremost, and I'll be included. And in that, make sure that the door has been open for me. I'm now keeping the door open for other people to come in who don't necessarily have the same chances, you know?
It's great to recognize our privilege and to acknowledge it and walk around understanding that and the responsibility that comes with it. On the flip side, I feel like sometimes it's like people abuse it as in masalan, you can't feel this way about this thing because you're privileged in this way. And I feel like that's the drawback of it. For example, for me, like I was saying, the idea of being like an immigrant child, really, when I'm trying now as an adult to like go through therapy and figure out the source of a lot of issues that I want to like improve in or understand, I can draw a lot of those things back to that experience. But I've spent years being back here, recognizing the privileges that come with someone that has like been raised abroad and has like a foreign education and speaks English and has like a passport and they can travel freely. I spend so much time doing that, which is good. I should still do it in many ways, but I was not paying enough attention to the things that also caused as a consequence and that I should also acknowledge and deal with. And you can be privileged and you can struggle in different ways. And both need to be acknowledged. But I feel sometimes the focus is so much on recognizing your privilege that you're expected to like ignore or sideline anything that came as a result of that was negative.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah. What does that mean?
Well, let's say like just you have the privilege of looking like the dominant white class, sure. But that also means that you then lack belonging with a part of your culture, let's say, and you're kind of like tossed up. Or which I think very often people forget about. If you grow up in wealth, you have a very specific set of really messed up things that can contribute to mental health, that contribute to a lot of like issues between yourself, your identity, your culture. Like, I can't empathize with poverty, but I can be very compassionate and hate it and fight against it. But there's within that there's like a conflict. Do I have a right to even talk about this subject if I'm not part of that group? And if I do, am I doing enough? Is it what is enough? You're always going to be called out, because in a world of like capitalism where money is king, people think that if you have money, you have no problems. But like, as our boy Biggie said, more money, more problems. And that's true. And it's not just problems. It's like a really intricate, twisted series of things that hinder your freedom. It can hinder your choices. You think that finances make you freer to make choices, but they can't. Just take Arab society and marital expectations. If you as a woman want to marry, you cannot have the freedom of choice to marry for multiple reasons, including financial. And in places that still have some types of like caste systems and socioeconomic levels, there are cultural expectations. Well, they'll say, oh, this person, you're in love with them. They might be the best partner out there for you, but you can't be with them because they're not at that level. Or your partner feels like they can't be with you because they're not at the level that your family was. And then you're kind of judged and you're stuck, or there's decisions that you have to make as to like where you want to live or what you can or can't do, because what is tied to that wealth and what are the restrictions that are then placed upon you family-wise or cultural-wise. And also like on the dark side of like pretty privilege, you know? There's a lot of things that happen subconsciously where, I don't know, even entrepreneurs who pitch that have like a great aura around them. It's called the halo effect. They're more likely to get funded even if their business looks terrible, right? Or is actually terrible, but they're judged on how they appear. The dark side of that is that sometimes people don't pay attention to what you say because of how you look. Or they'll say like, you look pretty, therefore you must be dumb. Or you look pretty and I didn't pay attention to what you said. I just looked at your lips moving and your eyebrows moving, and that's entertaining enough for me. That's your place in my world, you know?
Same for like this idea of like leaving and coming back and being like a global citizen versus always having or not having had the privilege of traveling or living abroad or going and coming freely. The flip side of that is that there's a lot to be said for like rootedness and having like grown up with the same people and having them as a support and network for your entire life versus all of your friends being scattered all over the world, and the person that you went to like third grade with is in like 5,000 miles away. You know, there's a lot to be said for the flip side of being able to roam freely, is that you don't have a sense of belonging. It's much, much more difficult, and you don't have that rootedness, and you have to actively seek it out and build it yourself. Whereas for other people, it might come naturally.
The idea of like nationalism, national identity, that rootedness and belonging in your culture. If I was 100% Lebanese, having grown up in Lebanon, having consumed Lebanese content, right? Having a Lebanese passport, I would, in theory, right, have a solidified form of identity much earlier. That's defined. And I wouldn't have struggled the way I struggle until this day to define my identity or to understand myself, because the things that define me are kind of like in the ether, and it's like a bit of this and a bit of this, and trying to explain it to people, you have to have them understand all of these different cultures and all of these different elements at play, rather than
just this person.
This
is who I am.
This country, the rights of this country, the culture of this country, the history of family in this country, and all of that being kind of like tied together. I always admired, like, not always admired, but I was very envious of people who early on could be so self-assured in who they were and who carried around their identity proudly. Because whenever I participated in like the Lebanese thawra, but even when I was 14 years old and we were doing like protests in France against the Syrian occupation, like I felt belonging for the first time because we were all united, but I still was othered in that space because there's like, why are you here? Like who are you? Like, but these issues don't directly affect you. Why would you argue? Why would you fight for us? Why are you speaking this way? You're not meant to be here. This isn't even a space for you to speak in.
I mean, this all wouldn't be a problem if the world was a better place.
Yeah, and I
if
think
it was like more equal, if boundaries are man-made, they're completely bullshit. Like if, you know, the freedom of movement, freedom to social mobility, all these things are part of the patriarchal, capitalistic, misogynist system that we're trying to fight against. And so a lot of these issues that we're talking about would not be so entrenched in the way people's lives are affected if it was, I know this is like, if it was a better place, if it was a more equal place to live, this world, but it's intentionally not.
And I actually struggle a lot with these labels and boundaries that have been created specifically around race.
Yeah.
The construction of race as a concept and racializing others with their differences. Like in this day and age, it's more irrelevant than ever. Like people are more mixed than ever. People are traveling and changing and immigrating more than ever, and racializing others to put them in a box that's convenient for the system, the way it's run, is so archaic. It shouldn't even exist in the first place. But there's this aspect of like wanting to almost adopt the terms in order to, like, I'm happy to say that I'm Arab. I'm happy to say that I'm also American. I don't need to fit into just the American box because it's safer for me to be racialized as white, European, American. I'm almost like taking back those labels, but I wish they didn't even exist.
But what you're describing is why there is a rise in right-wing political parties and regimes.
And nationalist identities and things like that.
Especially in the Middle West. In America, in Europe, I mean, that's exact because of what you said. Like the people are moving more, immigrating more out of need and like dire need or privilege because their choice. But that's exactly why there's a huge now swing back and backlash against that. And there's, you know, Trump is coming back, and we're going to talk about that in another episode.
That's like a whole other conversation also. I mean, there's this. What I find very interesting, I wrote a paper on this in college about the hyper-cosmopolitanisms. You know, these people that immigrate to, first of all, they immigrate from rural areas to cities. They become cosmopolitan, and how cosmopolitan cities around the world mirror each other more than they do with the rest of their immediate surroundings. So someone who lives in New York can live in London, can live in Tokyo, can live in Cairo, can live in Dubai, and it's more or less the same.
Than if they go to like a rural
Than if they went to Yonkers or Buffalo. You know what I mean? Like it might be a harder integration for them.
Yeah.
But then the more that people move to the city, the more they meet other people who move to cities. The more they make babies that are used to being in these cosmopolitan places. And then for some reason, it's like generationally now, I know I'll get along with someone who's like, I don't know, Swedish Brazilian, who grew up in Russia, even though I am not part of any of those cultures. But I know that we link on the multicultural lost identity mixed salad of an existence more than I connect with someone who's 100% Lebanese, born and raised in Lebanon, or 100% American, born and raised in America, or 100% French, born and raised in France. And I think that's really fascinating because it leaves room for a much wider form of connection.
So this conversation can go on forever. And we'll probably pick it up again in other episodes in different ways.
Because it's who we are, and who we are changes, and therefore what we have to say and what we know will change as the world also changes. We hope you enjoyed that episode. Sage Takes Thyme. Where are you from?
Who are you?
Who are you? What defines you? Who defines you?
But no matter who you are, you should like, subscribe, comment, share.
Join as a member on YouTube, support us, subscribe to wherever you get your podcasts. Every little bit helps. Let's stick together in our otherness and bring change.
And dominate.
Dun, dun, dun. The secret plot is exposed.